Yay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tuesday training for practitioners, one of my favorite things. And let me let a few more people in. Oh my goodness. Okay. Hello, hello. Welcome. It's nice to see you again, Charisse. So good. Hey, Jill, nice to see you. Okay, my loves, you can stay off camera if you like. You can come on camera at any time. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about joint mobility, specifically hip mobility today. And if you'd like to come on camera and join me, hi, Charisse. You're welcome to. You can also use the chat to communicate with me if you need to be quiet where you are, or you can also just come on off mute. I'm going to talk to you for a little bit first, and then we'll get into some Q&A. And of course, while I'm sharing with you, if you have questions, for sure, interrupt me and let's get the questions answered. So warm welcome to all of you. Warm welcome. Happy to be here with you on Training Tuesday. It's one of my favorite things. And you know what? It's one of my favorite things. And it's also one of my favorite things because now I know it's one of your favorite things, which makes me like it even more. So thank you for all of you who said that you want this back. So great, we'll do it. Here we are. If you're joining me for the first time, welcome. A brief introduction. I'm Gina Schatz. I'm both a manual and a movement practitioner. And I've been doing it for a couple decades. We don't need to go specifically into how old I was when I started, but it's been a minute. And so, you know, I kind of know what I'm doing over here. And I developed along the way the Schatz method, which is also a method for manual and movement practitioners to eradicate pain and dysfunction at the source. So that's what I like to talk about. So I'm a big anatomy geek, and I love to talk about how the anatomy is designed. And my belief is that if we bring our clients back to how their anatomy is designed to be, they won't be in any pain. So it doesn't matter if we're using movement or manual practices, they're all amazing and needed. And there's a commonality between us, which is how's the body designed? So that's what I want to talk to you today about. How is the body designed, and how is that design affecting our mobility, especially our hip mobility? So I don't know about you, but clients come in often with low back pain. And if I'm really paying attention, most of the time that low back pain is stemming from hips and pelvis. Is that happening for you? Yes, Charisse is like, yep, absolutely. Right, of course, because we know that 80 to 90% of the pain in the body is referred from somewhere else. So there's only really a 10 or 20% chance that where someone's pointing to their discomfort is actually what's causing it or where the cause is. So we get to be investigators and figure out, well, like, how is that causing pain, and where is it coming from, and what do I do about it? And the what do I do about it is, again, a big question. And I know that all of you are very skilled with lots of tools. Tools are amazing. Again, I work with a method, which is different than tools. I don't want to get too off on another trail here, but a method tells us like where to start, what to do in the middle with our tools. It's not a tool. And then where we're headed. So again, I use how is the body designed, and how am I going to get that person back to the where they're designed? And that includes all of my tools. But the method of starting out from point A to point C is the place that I want to talk to you about today when it comes to hip mobility. Okay. So I wrote in our newsletter. So our monthly newsletter, I did a little snippet of all the goodies, and I put a little training at the bottom. I hope you guys have your newsletter. If you're receiving them, awesome. If you're not, drop me a note. We'll make sure that you do. And I put in the bottom of the last newsletter something about hypermobility in the knees and how that affects hip mobility. So did you see that, Charisse? Did you happen to see that in your newsletter about hypermobility of your knees? I'm putting you totally on the spot, but I just want to know. Oh, you're muted. Are you talking to me?
No, I did not see that. I found that your newsletters were going into my junk mail box. So I'm trying to figure out, well, then I have to just have it go to, I've got a little account for you in my emails. So I just shipped it over there, but I think I didn't see that one, but I'm finding that a lot of time the hypermobility in the knees is coming from the hips too. And,
yes.
And the ankles and the feet and the ankles are involved. So
absolutely. Absolutely. Because everything from the hips to the feet are the columns that hold us up. Notice this lovely column behind me. The column holds up the building, right? So our legs are the columns that hold up our building. And that's exactly what I want to share with you. So when it comes to mobility, we have, normal range mobility, which is equal amount of strength and movement available in any given joint. And then we have the opposite ends of both of the spectrums. We have hypermobility and hypomobility. Now, if you don't know how to test for that, that's okay. It's easy to do. I have it in, I think, 4 of the online courses that we offer. The tests that we use in the method, my mastery practitioners test their clients because we need to know what their range of mobility is, because it's a wildly different treatment plan for hypermobility versus hypomobility. So it's not that mobility shows up in one part of the body or in another part of the body. Your constitution is either hypermobile or your constitution is not hypermobile or hypomobile. So it's a whole spectrum idea. So when we talk about hypermobility is a whole constitution mobility. And if we're going to look at hypermobility in the knees, what I shared in the newsletter were a few pictures where if someone's standing, instead of their columns being straight like this one, in hypermobility of the knees, they have the ability to take their knee joint posterior to their main axis. So their knees look bowed backwards, and their knee joint is actually stacked somewhere behind their ankles, sometimes even as back as far as their heels. And it's not meant to be that way. So I'm going to bring up Murph. If you guys haven't met Murph yet, he's my #1 assistant. He loves a good anatomy talk. So I'm gonna put his leg back on, and I'm gonna show you what I mean by the alignment of the knees and how they relate to the stability in the pelvis. Now, because Murph is he's disjointed, I guess, like I can take him apart, but what I can't do is create hypermobility in him because of the way he's put together. He's bolted in a way that would show normal mobility. So I can't actually show you hypermobility in him, but I can show you that line that I was talking about. And I do want to show you that line because, again, we're talking about how to get our persons back to how they're designed. Hey, let go of my hair. If we get our persons back to the way they're designed, they won't be in pain. That's the key. So we need to know how we're designed. If we know how we're designed, and then we have tools to take our clients back to where they're designed, they won't be in pain. That will be the permanent solution for them. And I know we're all looking for that. Okay, so this blue line is just tape, and I use this to teach other things, but it's actually really perfect for us right now. So he's only got one leg on right now just because he comes apart and gets put back together. But if you see his knee joint, right, so the knee joint itself is made up of 2 bones. It's not like an extra place in the body. It's where the femur and the tibia meet, right? Not the fibula, because that doesn't actually touch the femur, but where the femur and the tibia meet is the knee joint. Now, some of us don't even know that at first. So if you don't, and now you do, awesome. And if you knew it and it's review, great. Anytime we can review anatomy in our brain, it actually is very nourishing to our nervous system. So the alignment of this joint where the tibia and the femur articulate is specific to the way those 2 bones meet for sure. And then the column, as you think about the legs as a column, like this column back here in my building, if you think about the legs as a column, they need to align this joint. Ooh, we got some daylight today, which is super rare in my area. That's why I'm sitting in the side of the sun. Okay, this joint where the head of the femur and the acetabulum meet, when the columns of the knee joint, when the bones of the knee joint, the femur and the tibia are aligned, and the person is standing, it then aligns the head of the femur inside the acetabulum in a neutral position. Okay, so I'm going to tighten him up a little bit, and then I'm going to pull on him a little bit more, which I won't be able to show you, again, hypermobility because he's bolted. But if someone was hypermobile, when they were standing, instead of the femur and the tibia being aligned like this, straight on top of each other, they would be posterior. They would be bent almost backwards. Does this make sense? Are you seeing this in your mind? You know what hypermobile knees look like? Okay, great. Again, if someone's hypermobile in this knee area, in this knee joint, they're hypermobile as a constitution, most probably. Now, it's not 100%. You got to actually run them through that test to know. They can have a little bit more mobility in one area than another, but generally speaking, if someone is dramatically hypermobile in their knee, they're dramatically hypermobile in other places as well, and that puts them into the spectrum of hypermobile as a constitution. So let's assume for this conversation that we're talking about someone who's confirmed hypermobile, okay, and they've tested on this, they've scored on the test, they're definitely in the hypermobile range of 8 to 11. And this joint right here is bowed posteriorly. So this is the front of his body, this is the back of his body. If the knee joint is this direction, because of the mobility of what's available in the joint, that means that the bottom of the femur, which makes up the top of the knee, the bottom of the femur makes up the top of the knee. That means that the bottom of the femur is back here. Now, the tibia would then be forward because there'd be this bowed angle in the hypermobile joint, but that means that the bottom of the femur would be back here. And now look, it creates joint action up in the ball and socket joint, the head of the femur and the acetabulum. Because whatever's happening in the femur at the bottom is affecting what's happening in the femur at the top. The bottom of the femur is the knee, the top of the femur is the hip. So these things they start to feel like a cantilever. So in order for us to really identify where hip dysfunction is coming from, we can see it coming from the knee in a very strong hypermobile knee. Again, the femur is posterior, which means the head of the acetabulum is anterior. Now, what that means is a much more complex conversation. And that's because at this joint right here, this is a 360 joint. Anywhere two bones meet is a joint. And the design of the joint tells us how much movement is available at that joint. Like we know this, right? How much movement is available at a joint equals how many muscles do that movement. So we know that if this is a 360 joint, there's a whole lot of muscles that do that moving. And if the muscles do this moving and the movement is not optimal, meaning it's not the way we're designed, that means now we have muscles doing a job in their resting state that shouldn't be doing the job. And even worse, if the head of the femur is not placed in the right position, now it's happening dynamically while the person's moving. And that's where we create lots of patterns in the nervous system and lots of compensatory action, which is always tied to pain, okay? Dysfunction or pain or discomfort, doesn't have to be pain. I just had, it's funny that this came up in my conversation just now with you, because for a long time, I was told by clients and colleagues that I, navigate pain for a living, that that's my thing. And I thought, boy, I don't have the cleanest mouth. Like I kind of swear like a sailor. Let's just call it true. I swear like a sailor. So 4-letter words are not an issue for me, but something about the word pain, sort of a downer, it's really not a fun conversation. Not easy to market. No one really wants to talk about it. Everybody wants to, pull away from it like it's the plague. So, it was a little difficult for me in my marketing to talk about pain and the, resolution of pain, et cetera, et cetera. And so a client of mine just the other day said, it's not pain. I'm not experiencing pain. It's discomfort, a lot of discomfort. And I thought, I really like that qualifier, because for that client, it let them know that, it's not in a scale that they can't manage on their own. A lot of discomfort they can manage. Pain is a whole other beast. So I really appreciated them correcting me on that over and over again. So we don't have to necessarily be navigating pain. A lot of discomfort's already taken us out of the game of life. Nobody wants to be uncomfortable. You want to be free and feeling great in your body so you can go out and do the things you want to do. So that takes us back to our discussion about hip mobility. Now, if I have muscles in this area that are working when they're not meant to be working, or they're working just to hold the fort down, which means in their resting state, they're already tired, it will be very difficult for them to come on board and work in their function. And that's a problem. Specifically in the case, so that's number one, specifically in the case of hypermobility. Now, again, I said, imagine that we've tested this person and we know that their mobility is way in the scale of hypermobility. That means then that bony landmarks are a big contender in mobility. Paul Grilly taught us that. So instead of the bony landmarks being really strongly fixed, like at the knee joint with the femur and the tibia really meet together, they're softer, they're rounded, they're not as prominent when you palpate them. For those of you who are manual practitioners, when you palpate your client, you can feel the bony landmarks. Now I'm having a hair issue because of my braid and Murph today. So when we're palpating, we can feel the difference in bony landmarks, right? Like sometimes an ASIS will be really smooth and others times it'll be very prominent, right? Everybody has different bony landmark endings, but we all have the same ones. And the same bony landmarks have the same muscle attachments, which do the same work. So again, bring them back to how they're designed. In the case of hypermobility, not only is the femur and the tibia juncture a little looser or softer, but that also could most probably means that either the head of the femur is also smaller, which means there's lots of room to move around in the acetabulum, or the acetabulum is larger, which means there's lots of room for the femur to move around in the acetabulum. Now, even though this is a 360 joint, it still has an optimal place to be in neutral so that all the muscles that are there for the 360 action have a strong connection to the bone that they're moving. But in the case where there's a smaller femur, a head of the femur, or a larger acetabulum, or just the relationship between them is softer, like I mentioned, could be at the knee, that means that in a resting state, there's already a little bit more movement here. Just like in a resting state, there's more movement here to go posterior in a hypermobile knee, okay? When that's the case, when our person is standing, so here's Murph's foot, his foot would be here. When someone is standing and the pressure is coming in from the earth on their foot into their knee, which is hypermobile, the hypermobile knee moving posteriorly will actually jam the femur forward in the acetabulum. And now if you see that alignment, oh, can I get you that alignment? Yeah, if you see that alignment, that's not optimal, which means that now we're into other soft tissue, not just muscles. Now we're into connective tissue in the joint that is also being strained just from standing, So we know, I know, and I'm here to tell you that we have a formula to help us navigate dysfunction when someone's moving, okay? And if you're a manual practitioner and you, like me, your clients come and they lay down passively on the table, that's awesome. Except they didn't get in trouble laying down. They got in trouble moving, or they got in trouble from laying down too much and not having enough strength to move, which leads me to our formula. I know that we need optimal alignment, just like I just shared with you. We need that acetabulum and femur relationship to be neutral for not only the joint structure, the connective tissue, and the muscles. Same thing with the knee. We need these joints to be aligned so that we can then access the muscles that are there to move those joints and create strength in them. And while we're doing that, that's literally function. While we're moving, that's the function. If we start with function, if you're a movement person and you're starting your clients with movement, but they're not aligned, the movement is actually detrimental for all the reasons we just talked about. There can be strain on the connective tissue with the joints. There can be bypassing muscles so that they're not actually strengthening because something else is doing the job. So this formula of alignment, then strength, then function is really important. It's really important. And every time I follow that formula, I get to my answer with my client. In the case of hypermobility, that formula, alignment, strength, and function, can sometimes feel like whack-a-mole, meaning I need my client to be aligned, but in hypermobility, like we just talked about, their alignment is challenged. We've got to teach them to move their bones to a place that's actually neutral, at their optimal neutral alignment. And a hypermobile person who stands with their knees bowed back behind them, that feels like a resting place for them. But the reason it feels like a resting place is because they're actually bracing on the bones. They're bracing posteriorly on the femur and the tibia to hold them there. They're not actually aligning the joints to a safe place, which then engages muscles. So when we have hypermobile knees, as an example, when we have hypermobile knees, that's not stronger. That's a bracing. It's not actually muscle engagement. In fact, and you can practice this in yourself, even if you're a manual practitioner and you're not really working with movement a whole lot yet, when you're standing with your knees bowed backwards, you can only do that if you're hypermobile, but if you're standing with your knees bowed backwards, your quadricep muscles don't engage. They can't. And their job when you're standing is to help hold you upright. So they have to engage, and they can't do that if your knees are hyperextended, which lets us have proof that if we are in alignment, we can access our muscles. If we're not joint aligned, we can't access the muscles as readily. So we need to have that alignment first. And in a hypermobile constitution, that's trickier because they're standing with their knees hyperextended to brace, to feel like they have more strength, but actually it's preventing us from getting more strength because we can't access the muscles when they're there. Okay. And I feel like I'm talking a little fast because I like to get really fired up about this particular topic, and I could go on, and I know I only have an hour with you today, but I want to make sure that this is registering as I'm sort of talking fast. Good news is it's recorded. You can always play it back, but I want you to be getting it in real time. So let's just review here. In a hypermobile constitution, they also need to follow that formula: alignment, strength, and function. And when we are hypermobile, it is less likely that we are standing aligned. So we as the practitioners need to know what alignment is and how to get our clients there, whether we're movement or manual practitioners, because that's how they get out of pain, right? It's not from our magic thumbs. Although I used to think it was, and then I realized early on it was only good for a few days. It didn't actually resolve it because they walked out of my office doing the same function that they were doing that got them into the problem in the first place. So we need to know what that alignment is to bring them back to that alignment, and then teach them how to strengthen those muscles. Now, I will say that once we're in alignment the way we're designed perfectly. We are literally designed perfectly. This is a magic institution that we're walking around in. Once we're standing in alignment with our joints in optimal, the way they're designed, there's natural strength that's inherent in that. That's part of the magic design that we have. And of course, once we're injured or haven't been standing and using our bodies optimally for a while, there's the need for extra strength training for sure. And in the case of hypermobile constitutions, that's even more, given the classification of muscles that's involved. And I definitely am not going to bring that up right now, just because I want to keep it a little less muddy. You know that song when we were kids, the knee bone's connected to the hip bone, connected to the such and such? I used to think that was a little limericky. I think that's the phrase, a limerick, right? It was a little sing-songy for me. But the longer I teach anatomy, the more I realize that's like a real thing. Because it's not as easy to talk about a topic and not have it bookend or even domino effect into other areas, which then becomes another topic. So I really appreciate that you guys come on Tuesdays and you want just a nugget of stuff, knowing that it connects to other places. And I'm going to do my best to keep us on the track that I said we're on. So I'm not going to talk about muscle classifications, but that is another thing to contend with if you're navigating hypermobile constitutions. Okay, there's one other place that I want to share with you about how this alignment of the columns, the lower extremities, really does show up in hip mobility, and it might be something that we're missing. And interestingly, this was just brought to me from one of my mastery practitioners who was in a conversation with someone, a manual practitioner, and the conversation was around gait and how, walking with your toes in a turned out position doesn't really affect the hips. Oh, my friends, it does. And so let me walk you through that. It's not too dissimilar to what we just talked about with hypermobility in the knees, but now we're just going to take the hypermobility part off the table, and we're just going to talk about a regular range constitution. So it doesn't get complicated on mobility or muscle classes or any of that stuff that I wanted to take us down that road in. Let's just take all that and set it aside for a minute, and let's only talk about alignment in a normal range of mobility constitution. Okay, we're going to make it as simple as possible. Simple pie. Okay, so now let's talk about, we're going to bring Murph back. He's very happy about that. So now let's talk about walking. Okay, so gait. Gait starts with standing. Got to stand before you can walk. Standing on its own is something that we spend a lot of time in my mastery program, because there's a lot going on in an alignment position when we're standing. And again, the formula is alignment, then strength, then function, which means alignment, standing, then strengthening that before we function, walk. Okay, but let's just talk about walking. So here we are with our column that's holding up the building, okay? And the two columns, the two legs hold up the building that I say, which is the base where the sacrum lives in the body, the sacrum being the keystone of the entire structure, okay? So here we are in a standing position, and standing and walking are similar as far as the body parts that we use, right? Our legs. So here's Murph, and he's standing and his toes are forward, right? And so we want us to walk with this same alignment. But let's say, for example, your client stands with their toes out, or when they walk, their toes are out. Now, let me just stop here and say, I am not talking geometric measurements. Okay, nobody's taken a ruler and measuring millimeters. We are organic by design, of course. And what I'm talking about when I say toes forward relates to the hip. So let me walk you through there, okay? So if we're standing with the eye of our ankle, which is the center spot right here, the bottom of the tibia, the eye of the ankle, I call it the bullseye, straight forward, okay? That's what we want when our columns are in optimal alignment, because what does that do? It means that the tibia and the femur, the relationship here is neutral. If I turn my toe out, it takes my tibia with me, which means now my knee is in a different position. These two bones have a tiny bit of rotation available to them for emergency purposes only. But if I'm standing with my toes out, which takes the top of my tibia to this direction as well, let's call it 2 o'clock, but my hips are very forward, the hip at the femur, at the top of the femur, is now going in a different direction than the bottom of the femur, okay? Tibia is facing this way, hips go forward, which takes the femur back to 12 o'clock. So now we have a disparity between, his feet just fell off, between the tibia going to 2 o'clock and the top of the femur going to noon, okay? So that's one piece. Let's say though that there's no rotation in the knee. Oh, it was his head too. I promise you he likes this, but it does look like I mistreat him, doesn't it? Okay, so let's say now that we don't have any torque happening in the knee when someone's standing with their toes out or walking with their toes out. So there's no torque in the knee. Take out the first scenario I just gave you. Let's say it doesn't apply to this particular client. But still, standing with their toes out means that the lower extremity, the column, is laterally rotated. The whole thing is now at 2 o'clock, right? Instead of just the tibia being at 2 o'clock and the femur being at noon, the whole column is now at 2 o'clock. It has to be. It has to be because the toes can't move on their own. The foot connects to the tibia, which connects to the knee, which half of that is the hip joint, okay? So if the toes are pointed out, that means I have lateral rotation happening in my hip at a minimum. And lateral rotation at the hip is normal, that we're designed that way. But that's in a resting position, there is no lateral rotation of the hip. In a resting position, if I have lateral rotation of the hip, now we're into joint action, which means a whole host of muscles, the posterior side of the pelvis is contracted, and a whole host of muscles in the anterior side of the pelvis is lengthened. That's the lever system. That's the way we're designed. In order for things to move, one has to lengthen, the other has to contract. That's how we move. That's how we move joints. So if in a neutral position, these muscles are not neutral and these muscles are not neutral, now I'm not in an aligned neutral position to get strength in both. Can't strengthen a lengthened muscle. And now if I take that into gait, now I'm only working with part of the muscles in a contracted state instead of having a neutral alignment in this joint as I'm walking. And as soon as we have hip discomfort or hip mobility, I don't want to say mobility like hypermobility, as soon as we have functional discrepancies, there's my phrase, as soon as we have functional discrepancies in the hip joint, we know that we start hearing about back pain. Right? That's how we started our conversation, that we know that a lot of back pain is actually from hip dysfunction because 80 to 90% of the pain, discomfort in the body is referred from somewhere else. So that's it. Literally 30 minutes. I did it. I did it all in 30 minutes, which is exactly my goal. So I don't drone on forever. I know that might have been a little fast in a few places, and I hope that we kept up with each other, but absolutely I'm open to questions. So as always, first 30 minutes, I train you. Second 30 minutes, I'm open for Q&A. So does anyone here have any questions on what we just talked about on joint mobility? Charisse, I'm happy.
Yes, I have a couple of them.
Okay, great.
One, a lot of my clients that do walk with their toes out told me, at least a couple of them have, that it's a balance issue. So that to me, weakened muscles and obviously, then they're going to have a balance issue. And two, how much do you take into consideration the fascia lines and how they have interfered with the hips because of the crossbody stuff that goes on? Because I seem to be having more success with treating that crossbody fascia and getting it kind of release a little bit to release the hips. And two or three, I guess I have three questions.
Ooh.
With the hips and both of them being mobile, sometimes I find one side gets a little locked and hung up, and the other side is hypermobile. So do you run into that a lot?
I do. Oh my gosh. So I had to write these down because those are 3 juicy questions. I literally could spend the next 30 minutes on them. I'm going to do my very best to make it succinct. These are juicy, Charisse. This is amazing. And I love your questions because that means to me that I know how you're thinking about resolving it. And that lights me up. That's like literally why I'm here, to serve all of you. Okay. So let me just take them in order. Okay. I'll give them to you in order that you gave them to me. One was balance. The second one was fascia, and the third was discrepancies right and left, so an imbalance or a unilateral issue. Okay, so toes turning out when folks are walking must be corrected while they're standing. Okay, so in order for us to change patterns, we do patterning in our mastery program. It's part of my method, literally the second touchstone of the method. In order to change someone's functional pattern, you've got to find the static alignment first and create a pattern for that in the brain so that the brain has it in dynamic action. Once we're moving, there's a lot of things going on. It's a lot more firing happening in the brain. It's not really, I don't even think it's possible to change a pattern when you're in it unless you slow that pattern way down almost to a standstill, which is my point. Static is what works in repatterning. Okay, so really difficult for your clients to change their walking when they're in it. And when they bring up the issue of balance, that tells me something different is happening in that pattern. So when we turn our toes forward to alignment, it requires strength for everything in the lever system, like we talked about. We have lateral rotation of the hip. We know that deep 6 is contracting and adductors are lengthening. That's just how it rolls out. A lengthened muscle can't be strong. Can't be. And the adductors as a job, their job is to literally bring these columns up underneath the pelvis. They adduct the columns towards each other underneath the house, right? Those muscles can't be strong enough to do that job if the balance of the lever system is chronically out of alignment. This can't happen. The other piece that I know is that other classification of muscles that I told you I wasn't going to bring up today because it gets a little domino effecty, but intrinsic muscles are needed for optimal standing to be optimal and strong in that alignment. And when clients turn their toes out, they're using phasic muscles. We know that. They're using the deep 6 in the posterior part of their pelvis. They're literally contracting deep 6 to laterally rotate, because they're bypassing the weakness of the intrinsic muscles by overriding the action of the phasic muscles. That's all in their function, okay? So again, I could go on just that one question alone, Charisse. That's a lot. So your people are giving you really great information when they say, I can't turn my toes forward because it's a balance thing. You know that's potentially 2 big issues to solve for them. And when it gets solved, holy smoke, you're gonna like change their whole experience as beings in their body. And Charisse, are you a manual or movement practitioner? Just for my own context.
I'm a manual practitioner.
Okay, great. So me too, I'm both, right? So manual practitioners typically will spend a lot of time releasing muscles that are contracted or releasing muscles that are tight. And we know from the lever system that if our clients are in lateral rotation, the posterior muscles are in contractile stress and tight, but the adductors are lengthened and they're also tight, but they don't need to be released. So we end up spending a lot of time as manual practitioners releasing things because that's just what we do, but that's only half the game. To correct that functional pattern, we've got to show them something different posturally. And I
agree.
Yeah. And I get it. If you're a manual practitioner, you're not doing strength training. I get it. I didn't either for a super long time, and I still don't do a whole lot of it, but we do alignment. You can do posture with your person, and that on its own will strengthen them because it's bringing the lever system back to balance where both sides have equal strength and equal contraction. So that alone will add strength to your person that's needed for them to feel like they don't have that imbalance thing going on. Okay. So I'll leave that there. And I'll get to your other two. So you had a question on the fascia lines. Holy smoke. The fascia lines are amazing. I love them. I have my own relationship with them in my body. I don't teach them. I know what they are, and I absolutely, I address them, if you will. It's not part of my method. Tom Myers and other folks do more heavy teaching into the fascial lines. But what I do know and teach about fascia that works, that we apply in our method, is that fascia, when held in a position for 49 minutes, requires 20 to 30 minutes of lengthening to undo the bind that happens in fascia. Fascia being the most dense connective tissue that we have, runs head to toe. And this is information that I learned at the first International Fascia Conference. You really want to date it and find out how long I've been at this. And that was at Harvard a million years ago. And this takeaway changed my whole experience working clinically. I didn't even need to know where the fascia lines were. I'm not saying you don't need to know them. I'm just saying that for me, I didn't even need to know where they were. I just needed to talk in my own thinking about how long someone was holding a position. How many miles did they put on the walking gait with their toes turned out? How long did they sit at their desk? That's what I needed to know. It didn't even matter where the fascia was. I just knew that 49 minutes meant something. Now here's the ringer. At 50 minutes, 50, one more minute more, it takes 3 to 4 hours of lengthening those tissues to undo the bind in fascia. So wow. If we start adding that, and that's science, I didn't make that up. The scientists gave us that number. So if, we're here today together for an hour, we already passed the 49-minute mark. By the time, if you came at the beginning and you stayed till the end, we have bound fascia. It almost doesn't matter where those fascia lines are. I just know I got to move into an opposite position. Okay. And then if you're following the fascia lines, absolutely, you can find where all the binds are and then manually release them. It's not what I do in my clinical practice anymore. I don't spend the whole hour with my thumbs doing all the work. So I don't technically follow the lines for that reason. If you are a manual practitioner, you absolutely get to follow those lines. But here's the kicker for me. If my client comes in after a week's or a month's worth of patterning, and they've bound their fascia lines from lots of 50-minute sits or 49-minute sits even, and I can manually release them in the 60 or 90 minutes that they're with me, that's freaking awesome. And then what happens in the next days until they see me again? So now we're actually symptom treating if we're following the fascia lines and just releasing them instead of getting to what caused it to begin with. And we know that what causes it is long holds out of alignment. Okay. When the body's in neutral, when we're standing with our columns nice and neutral and our knees not hyperextended and our toes not turned out, just using the examples we came up with today, there isn't anything being held. We're back into the way we were designed. So there's nothing actively engaging or being held. There's nothing to release. There's stuff to work and strengthen, of course, because we're designed to move. But there's nothing that's out that we have to fix if we're back into alignment. And that takes us back to the beginning of my formula, alignment, strength, and function. Okay. And then your last one is perfectly, you asked them even in order. The last one with the imbalances, if we're noticing there's a discrepancy in one column from another column, that's telling me that first part of the equation, the alignment part, is not present. It's either not present in a static hold, like standing, or it's not present in function, which is the last part of the formula. Okay. If it's the last part of the formula, if it's not happening in function, we already talked about that. You get them back into alignment, teach them to strengthen the muscles equally on the lever system, and then work the pattern, walking, stairs, whatever, the way it's designed to be. But if someone is doing that and they are walking with their toes forward and their knees aren't hyperextended, again, I'm just using the examples we have today. There's a million examples, but just using the ones that we came up with today. If they're not doing that and there's still an imbalance right to left, that tells me it's more internal structural, like the sacrum being askew. And that's a different set of tools. I can't teach it to you here because we need a person and the whole bit. It's another piece of it's a touchstone number 1 in my method. It's a big piece that we talk about in the Mastery Practitioner Training Program, but it is a key piece that I couldn't even find with my own eyes or my thumbs. I had to actually measure the body and let the body tell me that the sacrum was a little askew, and then figure out what was causing that, and then address it with my tools. So that's another piece that I would suggest you might want to look at, Charisse, because an imbalance right to left is definitely going to change the function, or it started with function and now it's creating an alignment issue. It's a little bit of a catch-22. It almost doesn't matter where it started. What matters is that you interrupt it. Because if you know there's an imbalance right to left, that is a recipe for future pain. And I don't even mean discomfort. I mean, that's a recipe for future pain, especially when we start talking about, I'm just going to pick up Murph here and try not to throw his head and his foot all over the place, especially as we talk about the legs as columns holding up this house that houses the sacrum. If there's something going on here in this hip joint or here in this hip joint, there has to be a discrepancy feeding into the sacrum because of the design of the body. This hip joint is part of the innominate, which literally articulates with the sacrum. If the sacrum's out, nothing else can be okay. So that's what I would say to those three awesome questions. How'd I do? It's 12 minutes of a lot of talking. Did that serve you?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Do you have a follow-up question on any of it?
No, it's fascinating. Of course, some of the people have had an injury or an accident that kind of immobilized the sacrum. Not all the segments of the sacrum are working properly or something like that. So
what do you mean by that? All the segments of the sacrum aren't working?
Well, there's three major segments, S1, S2, S3. And so I have found that S1 and S2 might be locked, or just S2 is locked on one side, and it throws the whole function of the hip off. Not all the time can they relate to an injury or anything that's happened. It's just, it is what it is at the time I see them, and they're coming in because they're in pain.
Sure. What type of injuries are you talking about?
Oh, I don't know. Skiing accidents, hiking accidents, falling down, those kind of injuries, car accidents.
Mm-hmm.
I work in an orthopedic clinic, so I see a lot of injury.
Sure.
Folks or people in pain.
Right. Yeah, me too. That's where I started. I love it. It made my brain really feel purposeful. So this is what I'll say. So of course I'm not in the room with your people, so I can't tell you what I see or what I would do specifically, but I want to support you here so that, because I know that's what you're asking and you want to be able to serve them, and I get it. Generally speaking though, not on any particular person, because again, that's not even ethical for me to talk to you in that way. But generally speaking, if there was impact trauma to the pelvis and the innominants as they relate to the sacrum, only one of them was affected by the impact, falling down, skiing accidents, etc., or even if their foot's on the brake while they're in a car accident, that means that their pelvis is doing, one innominate is doing something different than another. It just has to be, because the adductor means that the femur is crossing the midline to be on the brake pedal. Okay. So what that takes me to is an innominate impact on one side versus the innominate freedom on the other side is really the issue. And I hear you that they're having sacral pain for sure. The key with S1, S2, and S3, as you're referring to, is that it's still a fused bone. And on one side versus another side still takes me to the SI joint as it relates to the innominate. So it's not that the sacrum is fused and it can't move. That's not technically accurate. But on one side at S1 tells you it's a little higher in the SI joint where the ilium and the sacrum meet. So I would look more in the function of what's happening in that joint, and I would absolutely get that sacrum back into alignment.
Yes,
Sacrum,
definitely. Well,
yeah.
What I find a lot of time is going on is they come in with back pain, psoas pain, hip flexor issues, and one side's more dominant than the other with issues. And so it's just, they come in a storm, and it's usually always coming from the hips and the sacrum being out of balance.
Yes. Yeah, totally. The cool thing about that is that you absolutely can affect that, right? Like there's no pain that I shy away from. It sounds like that's true for you too, Charisse. There's no pain that I shy away from, and I know I can get this to the source of it. I know I can, and you can too. If the sacrum's imbalanced or out of alignment, that will prevent you from getting a permanent result for someone. So the key is to get that sacrum in alignment and then find a way to hold it there.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that
Finding a way to hold it there, because I feel sometimes like I'm treating symptoms as they'll come back, and sure, maybe coming back once in a week or something to make sure everything's all together, because the muscles are not used to firing in a normal alignment anymore. But then when they have to keep coming in, I'm kind of scratching my head. Okay, what am I missing? What more do I need to do to help them?
Right. So what are you doing to hold the sacrum in place?
Well, I do some zero balancing. I might do a little bit of fascia unwinding to make sure that it's not pulling the hip forward or something.
Okay.
And it's just in that one treatment. So at least allowing the muscles to regroup and get into their proper function. And I just feel then it will hold after that. But I go not only the hips, I do the knees and the ankles and the feet and everything. So to make sure that the whole pillar is functioning the way it should be, because if I leave one of them undone, then they'll definitely be back.
Okay. Yes. Right. Totally. So I love how thorough you are. Are you open to some feedback? Are you open to me pouring into you a little bit more specifically? Or,
oh, sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm just noticing the time. If anyone else has a question, type it in the chat and let me know. Otherwise, it's Charisse and me for the remaining few minutes here. And that's totally great if no one else has a question, but I just want to make sure that if there are other questions that I'm answering them for you. So please, if anyone here has another question, let me know. Okay, Charisse, so here's the thing. Here's what I heard you say, that you release everything from the sacrum all the way down the column, down the extremity, lower extremity. Amazing. Love it. And releasing is not the same as holding. So there's a gap right there when we first started and saying, okay, so you put the sacrum in alignment and then you get to hold it there. There's a gap there in your treatment because we haven't held it yet. All we've done so far is release everything, which is amazing. But the next step for you is, how do you get them to hold now? How do you engage muscles that haven't been engaged while they've been in crisis? That's the next piece. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And sometimes though, those muscles, frankly, are too tired and they don't engage. Or it might take a little bit more neuromental connection to get them to engage if they've been like chronic like that for a while.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. A muscle is going to be tired if it's been abused or misused for a while. But here's the key. The body's designed the way the body's designed. And when we take the body back there, there's no pain. So if a muscle, as you said, is tired and been offline for a while, of course, it's been under trauma, but it actually wants to be doing its job.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. So we've got to, you have it in you to figure out for your client how to get those muscles to hold, because you're right. Otherwise, there's nothing holding that sacrum. It's going to slip right back out and you're going to come back in and treat symptoms again. And they're going to rinse and repeat. I totally get it. I was doing the same thing for a long time. And I, like you, grew tired of it pretty quickly.
I want to do better for them. I'm not so tired of it. I mean, it's fine for me for them to keep coming in, but I want to help them more. I want to help them better.
Right. Yeah, I heard you correctly. I used a phrase that I was growing tired of not getting the results. I didn't say that you were tired of your work. I thank you for correcting.
No, I love my work.
Same, totally. I still, like 3 decades later, I love my work. I'm not tired of doing my work. I was tired of not getting a result. That meaning my phrase, I was hungry to find a solution, and I'm hearing that in you too. You just want a solution. I get it. I totally hear you. The other thing that I heard you say, are you ready? Are you open for more feedback?
Yes.
Okay. The other thing that I heard you say was, when and if I release everything in the fascia band all the way down, again, amazing, that will restore function. And that's not true. Function is when things are moving. Function's not when things are passive. So massage therapist as well. I know you're talented. Again, you're in an orthopedic office. I started in an orthopedic office. I feel you. I get you. I know what you're doing. It's amazing. And they need you because they are suffering week to week, some of them. And function is how the body moves. It's not what happens under our thumbs. So there's another.
Right. So usually after treatment, sometimes during the middle of the treatment, I have them walk around the table.
Okay.
To see how they're moving and what they're experiencing. And
Okay.
I do that always at the end because I need to know what's going on.
Great.
I am booked out 2 months in advance solid. And so they may not have an opportunity to get back and to see me right away if they need to. So.
Right. So you got to really make sure you cover it while they're there. Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
So what's the feedback that you typically get? I know it's different person to person, but what's typical feedback that you get when someone's walking around after you've worked with them manually?
It's a miracle. I can't believe I've gone to so many people.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll go to orthopedics and osteopaths and physical therapy, and then they're coming back because I've been able to get them better mobility and less pain or pain-free right away. But I want it to hold so they don't have to come back in a week.
Right, exactly. So what do you think is missing then? So they're having an amazing physical experience while they're there, but it's not holding. It's rinse and repeat. What do you think that's about?
Well, there's a dysfunction still going on somewhere, and I'm sure it's probably muscular. If I'm able to align the bones and get the bones in alignment to where they should be, then there's a piece there that I don't know if I should be giving them more. I do have some exercises that they can do for different things, and I don't know if I'm hitting on the right exercises. Like a lot of times their glutes aren't engaging, and so I give them exercises to do that. To feel engaging. And that's just a simple sitting in a chair and pushing your heels down the floor and kind of trying to push them forward. So I get them to feel their glutes, what it feels like to have their glutes engaged. You know, those kind of things.
Okay, awesome. So you're saying that you're not sure what exercises to give them if it's like targeting the right muscle?
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, with the sacrum, it's like, well, I've gotten things like what's it called, dead bug, different exercises with dead bug and glute bridges and so forth to kind of strengthen those. Laying on the floor and doing the leg lifts up and back. That's really good for aligning and strengthening the SI joints.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes I almost feel like a PT.
Yes, I totally get that. Totally. So what you're saying is really important, Charisse, because the exercises I love the exercises that you're doing. It's great. I love that you're even doing them because we have to bring that strength part back. Right. And it sounds like you could be doing more of that for them, right? The holding. And every time you think it's not holding, there's not a strength, there's a lack of strength. And in order to have strength, there's got to be alignment first.
Right.
So, for example, glute max exercises next to a torqued sacrum, never going to work. Can't engage them. Can't engage them fully to hold it. Or you can engage them and you're holding that sacrum out of alignment. And so there's that formula again, alignment, strength, function. It's got to be
right. No, I'll align them first. And when I show them the exercises, I want them to do it while I'm there so I can see what's firing and what's not firing. I mean, I've gotten more in tune with doing that. Mm-hmm. But I have such a short period of time to work with them that sometimes we run out of time. And a lot of times I go over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. I love what you're doing. I love your questions. I also love that you're here to learn more. That lights me up. We're going to talk more about function next week. So next week is the 20th. So that's our last training Tuesday in this month. So we're going to talk next week about more function. And I love that you're here and I hope that you'll come back and we can talk more. If you have a specific client that you like a client case study, we've done really successful hot seating with that before because you and I right now are talking ideas and concepts, which is great. They've got to be there. If there's someone in particular that you're like, I've done the same treatment 3 times with this person and they feel good when they leave and they come back again, then walk me through it and let's see if we can find someplace else that I'm hearing in your treatment plan that you might be able to apply for them and see if you can get results. It's up to you. If you want to do that, you're welcome to. You're always welcome to bring that kind of question. Yeah, and we'll keep pouring into you so that you can continue to pour into your clients because you're doing amazing.
Okay, sounds awesome.
Love it. Charisse, thank you so much for your questions and for how juicy they are. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you create next. I'm also looking forward to spending more time with you. So please come back when you can. For everybody else, if you're watching the replay, I'll put some links below. Charisse, this might appeal to you too. There's a functional anatomy masterclass that I shared on that formula. and how to figure out what part of the formula you're on. And if you've missed a piece, I'll put that link in the video after it populates on YouTube, and you're always welcome to go back and review this, of course. If you're watching on the replay, the links will be below as well. And I will see you guys all in a week. Oh my smokes. I'll see you next Tuesday. All right. Thanks for being here.